Welcome. I am Frederick Philip Von Weiss, and you are consuming the Thunder Nerds, a conversation with the people behind the technology that love what they do and do web good. And I just want to first start off by thanking everybody for taking part in the show. And if you like us, love us, please rate us on iTunes or YouTube, subscribe, and give us a shout out. Now, that being said, without any further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our guest today. We have a very special guest. We have independent design systems engineering consultant. Let me say that right. James Stone. Welcome to the show, James.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, man. I ran into you, I think, by via LinkedIn. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think I maybe added you or you added me, and we started chatting, and so that was fun.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's interesting how everybody could get together these days. So, and you're in San Francisco, correct?
Well, I'm pretty close to San Francisco. I used to live in the city, and now I'm about an hour and a half away in a small college town you probably never heard of called Davis, which is just surrounded by cows and stuff. But an hour and a half, and I'm right in the middle of the city. Yeah.
Oh, that's not too far away. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So why in that town? You said, what's it called again? Beavis?
Davis.
Okay. I was thinking like Beavis and Butthead. I was going to ask about that, but okay. So what's going on over there? Are you from there originally?
No, I've got family in the Sacramento area, and it's a small college town, and it seemed like a cool place to live for a while. And my wife was in school, but not at UC Davis, at another school, which will sound really bizarre. But yeah, it was just kind of an experiment. We lived in a small college town called State College, Pennsylvania before, and it's got a different dynamic, but it's interesting in a college town. It's got a different kind of mix than I would say a regular small town.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not just the rural kind of vibe, but you also have some more probably interesting art scenes, some music going on, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And Davis is kind of quirky, so you drive in through farms and all this kind of stuff, and then you cross the road, and then they have these like old British double-decker buses driving around town. They're really into agriculture, so they've got a big arboretum. There's trees all over the city, so a lot of things you wouldn't normally find in a small town. And just a lot of students, a lot of coffee shops. Per capita, like not like one. There's like, I don't know, 15 or 20. So
it's not just two Starbucks.
Yes, exactly.
That's cool. I'm sure you got a few good breweries around there as well.
Oh, yeah.
That's a must.
Yeah, of course. I'm from a dry family, so I can't give you any tips, but there's a ton. And yeah, sorry, I can't give you the exact intel there.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I wanted to jump into some of the things I read about you and on your website, and maybe you could help elaborate a little bit. So I see it says helping visual brands build online systems. So an independent design systems engineering consultant from California. So help companies streamline complex development projects across teams with diverse personalities and skills. Could you go into that a little bit and what that pain point might be that you're alleviating?
Oh yeah, sure. So, for the past, I would say like 4 or 5 years, I've been working with agencies or visual designers or companies that have a design resource, right? So this is like at a certain level, you've got a designer on board or a team of designers, or you've hired out to an agency, and you got to make that a reality. And that's either, like a version 1.0 MVP. Okay, we're going to market. How do we do it quickly and, not lose ourselves in the process? The other part is, sometimes they call it UX heavy changes, which is just another way of saying a redesign or a revamp, or you might think of this as like a Silicon Valley 2.0. So we got some cash and we're hiring that awesome agency. We've got the designs, but you've got like your version 1.0. How do you get from point A to B? And I'm not talking about in terms of features on the back end, right? I'm talking about like, how do you get all that visual design and goodness and animation to be performant, look great, and work traditionally like in a web app or a web marketing site. So I've been kind of like this in-between person who lives in between both camps, the design and the development camp, helping the designers communicate their ideas to the developers, and for the developers not to get too lost in the details and maybe not have to take on problems that they're not as well suited for.
Isn't that a old story, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's every company where I mean I've worked at places to where it's a huge frustration in actually probably in both areas, right? In the design part of the house and in the development part of the house, where development is complaining about, oh, this isn't clearly communicated to us, so
Hmm.
we have to make these changes so fast. And they make these changes, and I think I'm citing one of the things that you pointed out in your site, where they're just picking these arbitrary primary colors. They're FF0000,
Oh, yeah,
and
exactly.
that's a color, and they just run with that. They're like, hey, I don't got time for this shit. I got to get this out by 3 o'clock because my boss is asking about my TPS reports. So then on the design house, it's complaints going, hey, I have the system in place and they're not following it. But maybe there's some kind of communication error in both parties to where there's not a cohesive flow of design and development.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's a funny thing, like the foo or foo bar, all these like developer jokes kind of embedded into their color system. And to be honest, I recently just did an audit of a site that we were working on, and all sorts of hard coded CSS and that's like the first thing to search on is like the foo, and it's like hundreds of different versions, and they're
Uh-huh.
like, it's red, right? It's red, and you know I can totally get that, because the problem is like the designer didn't really put them in a place maybe to perhaps succeed, right? They didn't say, this is a specific red. We're going to use this consistently. We're going to call it this. And maybe there was some forethought into creating a variable or something that is the red everywhere, not like whoever the developer of the day is jumping in red, green, or whatever. So yeah, I think, and on both camps, and I think really the problem isn't that oh, those developers are so bad, they use the wrong red. And who's gonna even notice, right? Like my grandma, like I'm like, grandma, which red's red? She's like, they're the same, right? But when you're investing the money into like, professional design, it really does matter. And you want to have brand consistency, right? Like you wouldn't want to see the Nike swoosh as a plus. You'd be like, what's this Nike plus, right? So
Yeah, somebody's getting
I,
fired for that.
yeah, someone's fired for this Nike plus, no swoosh. So yeah, I think fundamentally they I would say the commonality between both groups, right, designers and engineers, is they're both expert master problem solvers, right? So you get engineers, they are fascinated with a problem to solve, and they are very good at it. And designers are also really good at that. But the difficulty is that they solve problems in kind of a different methodology, right? So designers use kind of this bottom up approach, if you think of like the triangle, and they're like trying everything. They're like, what could it be? It could be anything, right? They're trying to imagine everything, and then they do like thumbnails, and they start small, low time involvement, and they get to this thing where they kind of refine to the process eventually, right? And this can be the problem too, right? You're talking about like the designers, they're like, oh, they're kicking over these changes, I never heard of them. Sometimes that pyramid, like they didn't get, like the design wasn't final and someone kicked it over, and then they're still in that iteration process, kind of making the engineers insane in the process. But engineers often will think about the problem, and they're really doing the top down approach, right? Thinking about the problem, how do we branch this out? What are the different use cases we have to worry about? What is it that's going to be important to the project? And then eventually they get down to what all the details are. So it's a really opposite approach. And I would say some opposite folks sometimes, in not polar opposites, but they have different personalities, different tastes, different agendas maybe. And you throw them together in a room and you're like, okay, figure it out. Well, sometimes that's not the most efficient way, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fair enough to say. And to go to append to your point a little bit, yeah, if a designer is doing things where, well, maybe it's not the designer. A lot of times when you have projects, it's a project that's been crossed an ocean of time, right? It's not
Mhm.
something that it's a one and done. Every project is usually something that's a living, breathing entity, right? So you have
Sure.
something that started 3 years ago that people are still working on. And you might have a designer that's not even there anymore, and a designer that worked on it a year ago. And you have these styles that might be, way down the page or somewhere else, or they didn't do something like they're not familiar with pre or post processing, so they don't know to look for a variable somewhere in the SAS. Like they don't know what a partial is,
Mhm.
or if somebody's using CSS variables right now, like So, there could be some kind of confusion with that. And then if that's not communicated well properly with documentation to a developer, they don't have time to hunt for that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And what I found is when you put an engineer or a developer in the position of like, okay, I have to do this. I can either look through 10,000 files and figure it out, or I can just go on Stack Overflow and find something similar. Like you can probably guess where they're going to grab that color or the code or a component from.
Exactly.
And this is where things kind of start to fall apart. And I think, the blame there, I mean, I don't know if it's really on the designer or the developer, but like maybe the person managing the project. Hopefully there's someone in charge. It's not just like, Wild
Ooh,
West or whatever.
PM.
But yeah, and you have to have some sort of set process and in some semblance of documentation. At least like when you start to have these problems, start documenting so you resolve those problems so you don't like keep continuing having the problems time after time after time. And I think if you can address them early on, at least you don't have to get like 99.9% coverage, but if you can get pretty decent coverage quickly and document the important bits, well, that's going to save you a lot of time later on trying to figure out what happened or ending up with like, I don't know, 10 megabytes of CSS or something like that. Or, it just, things get really out of control, especially as a project grows in size.
Oh, easily and exponentially. Yeah. Things like that get out of hand so quick. And it might help and behoove people to think about those things at the beginning and not as an afterthought. I mean, even if you have to do it as a phase 2, sure, whatever, but you at least have to have it on the radar. But talking about this is where you come in. So explain when a company has this problem, and who are you going to call? They give you a call. They call, get the wolf on the line. Get James Stone. Get him down here. We got 24 hours. You got to clean this up.
That's right. That's right.
And you come and you school everybody. So what exactly happens at that point?
Yeah. So I would say a couple of things happen. One is like usually an agency redesign that's going one of many ways, and they're under pressure, right? They got to hit this deadline, that, whether it's for funding or for some other purpose. And so the clock's ticking. And what do they have like Photoshop files with maybe 100,000 names that are named random things like number 5, number 6, number 7 or something, right?
Weird layer names.
Yeah, and if you have a team of people that are like, yes, I love this kind of problem, taking Photoshop files and turning them into CSS and HTML, great. You have no problem, really. Have them do that and document it, right? That's really kind of the process. But if you don't have that, well, how do you get from that to the performant code? Well, I've been working with some agencies. I've been also doing work on my own. And what I found is a good intermediary step is to create front end code, meaning taking a couple of layouts. We're not thinking of pages anymore, so we'll call them a layout. But you might think of them as like pages, like a certain subset of pages, say 5 or 10 or 3 or whatever that number is, like kind of the core functionality of the site. And you build those out, right? You either use a framework or whatever you're going to build. You build those out. And you're like, here's the example, right? Kind of like if you had a model home, right? It's like different tract homes, at least in California. Like they have the model home and be like, oh, build all these other homes. Here's the model. Now, really, you want some blueprints probably also too, but you can kind of visualize what it's going to look like and like how it's actually going to be built. You can go in there and open the windows and kind of look around. So front end code has been really useful. And I think it's really important to kind of separate that from the back end stack. I'll tell you, almost every project I've been involved with where they're like, no, we want to go straight from the design file into the back end tech stack. Or
bring it into React right away. Yep.
Always been a disaster. And they don't solve problems that are maybe potentially difficult. And like once they get it all in there, it's really hard sometimes. Sometimes things are over-engineered, or like, what template is this? Or like, let's say you're trying to integrate some complicated graphing library with React, like you said, or Angular, and then you're trying to figure that out on the fly and also match it up the visuals. It's really hard at that point, I think, to solve those problems. So also it provides a sense of isolation, right? So you can isolate the problem and solve all the front end visual bits outside of all the tech stack. And then you got the model home, right? Otherwise you'd have like the model home be like, well, the garage isn't there, but just imagine, right? what
that's not going to work.
Yeah, what it could look like. The lawn eventually. Yeah. So I think this idea of imagining what it should be like or making that connection, like engineering time is super expensive. Like I'm sure engineers, are not known for being the cheapest people like on the block nowadays. And so you don't want them sitting around just thinking about and imagining things or getting creative about this stuff. You want to really give them a tool that they can kind of architect and then build it out quickly, kind of focus on the core business logic.
Yeah, they should be creative about the code they're writing, not about the front end aspect of the actual CSS and things like that and how that matches up and looks. Yeah, they have their own thing that they have to worry about. That's also very creative in that respect and deserves their time in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't mean to say like, hey, engineers are not creative. They're absolutely brilliant, creative people, but that creativity is better focused in different things. And when I'm talking about this problem on the front end, it's not really front end engineering, because I know plenty of front end engineers, but there's like this other part, right? And for me, I call it design systems engineering. It's this bridge, right, between like systems and design and engineering. You got to understand engineering principles, like who are the people you're building this for, right? You can't just build like, oh, here's a bunch of I don't know, guidelines of like what the font should look like or this kind of thing. This kind of throwback to print. Like you want like variables and things that are extensible and they're going to be reusable. And but the other part of it, and I don't know if it's necessarily creativity, but it's just understanding design well enough, understanding the visual nature of things and having a certain level of detail that you can kind of go, okay, these are not aligned correctly. This is not looking like, so for someone like myself, it's really important. Like I look at the design files and I'll go to the designer. I'm like, this is off by 2 pixels. Is this intentional? The font is 15 pixels here. Are you sure that's what you want? It's not 14 or 16? Because I go through and look at it and I look for inconsistencies. Now, I don't think that engineers are necessarily looking for this level of detail, and it requires a specialized person. And for me, I'm a self-taught engineer. My mom taught me to program in 2nd grade. I've worked in industry my whole life, and then I went back to school for design. And so it's kind of this marriage of 2 interests. But I think you could come from either camp. You could be a UX designer and like really start to get interested in code and CSS and like what that is and start building things out. And I think as an advocate for the user, it's a great thing because you have a lot more control, right? You could be like, I really want this experience to be a certain way. Well, then you have a lot more control if you're building it yourself and can pull it off. And then some engineers have a strong interest in this as well, but I don't think it's for everyone. It's the big thing. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, if you have a little bit of an understanding of both, and you might specialize in one or the other, or maybe you're a generalist, I don't know. But if you have some kind of understanding, at least of how to, when you're designing, what that HTML might look like in your mind, or vice versa, you're probably going to have a better result, I would think, at the end. So what did you start programming when you said in 2nd grade? What were you programming?
In 2nd grade. So my mom, she's a clinical microbiologist, and cool. She describes me as having a child. She's like, you were a very interesting experiment, she says. I was listening to it the other day. And so as this experiment continued in 2nd grade, this was in the 1980s, but they had just dropped the prices of personal computers, which at the time were only for people with a lot of money, or they were very like kind of hobbyists, but they were expensive, like thousands of dollars, which would be like tens of thousands of dollars a day or something. And so there was this Atari that came out, Atari 600 XL, and it was very cheap, like a couple $100. She brought it home, some other stuff, got a book in BASIC and taught me to program in BASIC. Now, what's funny, she never continued. She even asked me recently, she's like, whatever happened with that BASIC stuff? She's like, I'm still thinking about it. So she never did any programming ever since that time. She introduced me to this. But for me, it like created a whole career and a lot of interest. Yeah. So
it's funny. It's usually 2 different avenues that people travel that get them into development. It's either music, which they that's usually how you get to become a designer, because you're building and designing things for your own website and band, And then developers, it's usually I had an Atari or whatever, and that kind of got me into development, because that's the route that I started down. So yeah,
that's funny. I might be both. Maybe that's why I ended up in both camps, because at one point I had a development job and I thought, it'd be super cool to work for Tower Records. There's a magazine that used to put out called Pulse magazine.
Uh,
They're like hanging out with like music writers, and like rock stars would come and like play in the boardroom and bring brownies. It was kind of surreal.
oh, that's cool. Did you ever play in a band? You ever do any music?
Yeah, I think I can say I was in one band at one time, and it
All right.
was when I was at Tower Records. So if I think if you think you want to create a band, you've never done it, uh, go work for a music company, perhaps. That's maybe the path.
Yeah, I could second that. What
Yeah.
kind of music was it?
It was electronic music.
Oh, okay. What year was
Yeah.
this?
This is, oh boy, when was this? Around the 2000s, 2001 or so. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Not too long ago. Like 16, 17 years. You got some stuff out there? Can we hear anything?
Oh, wow. So I would say my one claim to fame. So I got really into electronic music, but this is not really my main gig right now. But I did do a remix for a friend of mine who actually went on to be a pretty big artist. His name's Wellenrosh, and I did a remix of a song he did called "Welcome to Berlin," and it was released in Finland.
Nice.
And
You could say I'm big in Finland.
Yeah, I was huge in Finland, and it was a CD and a record that I think that was put out, and then it was featured on a DJ compilation. But like I was never in Finland, and this is the early days of the internet or whatever. So I think I have the CD somewhere. But yeah, I mean, it was fun. Good stuff.
That's awesome. You got to put that up on Spotify or something.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, that's so cool.
It might be there. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. You take a look. I'm gonna do a search for you on Spotify later on. See if I can find it.
Sounds good.
So how did you get into? You're doing mostly freelance now, right? This is your main gig.
Yeah, this has been my main gig for years.
Yeah, that's cool. And so you do that. You help out at some other places, right? You help out at your old school, right? Didn't you went to Penn State, right?
Yeah, so I went to Penn State. Right now, I don't know the term you would use. I think normal people call me like an adjunct professor, but I teach online.
Yeah, I think that's the normal.
Yeah, I teach online a course, and yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I'm still involved in the arts. It's actually a studio art class where we teach programming as a form, or as a technique that you use as an artist. So really, it's like if you want to be creative, like if you're listening to this and you're a coder or whatever, an engineer, and you're like, I want to be creative with my really be creative, like really, this is like maybe the kind of thing you might be interested in. But yeah,
that's kind of cool. All right.
Yeah.
So you got into that, and are you doing more of these courses too, the videos?
Yeah, so I've been really focused on online courses. So like I teach at Penn State. I'm actually developing a course for them right now as well, and kind of a different topic. And then I have another course that I created recently, and I kind of got well known, especially in the Zurb Foundation area, for creating videos on YouTube, screencasts, teaching people. And this is, I think, from like December of 2013, where this started to get more popular. And it's like, I used to be on Stack Overflow, and I was very interested in this technology, and people ask questions, right? And you're like, I know the answer to this question, like, I don't want to sound inaccessible, like, oh, only the experts can ever answer on Stack Overflow. But, I was learning something, prior to that. And then at one point you kind of, the student becomes the teacher, so to speak. And I was answering questions, and I found out, at least at the time, there was a lot of engineers or just people in general that didn't understand grid systems. I think if you take a designer and tell them about grid systems, and they learned about design recently or still involved, they have no problem understanding what that means. But I think if you've never been exposed to that, it's really pretty difficult. So I just created a video like how to use the grid on Zurb Foundation, and I just showed what the common patterns were, because it was actually very easy. I say, like, here's a 2-column, here's a 3, like.
Well, I mean, they lay it out for you. Excuse the pun. they lay it out for you pretty well. I mean, all that stuff is so well documented. They do such a great job at that.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So I started doing these videos and talking about Foundation and other things I was doing. And, now I think there's like hundreds of thousands of views, and I don't know, like thousands of subscribers. And
that's awesome.
And so, kind of helped out the community. I became well known. I started doing that kind of work. And so it's been interesting. So I kind of teach, and then also, get paid to do work for people who need to fill those gaps, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, I think it lends to it a little bit by things like you said, like or things that you document, where you said that you have good professional audio, which usually helps. I mean, there's so many um tutorials that I've looked up in the past and even recently where I can't hear what somebody's saying,
Yeah.
or for some reason there's some kind of electronic dance music that's way too loud.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of those where there's it's disappointing sometimes when you think you found, oh great, this is going to help, and then it's like so. And also too, you have a good voice for audio too as well. So I mean, I know that sounds goofy, but things like that really do help when you're trying to learn something that somebody's teaching you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say it one more time. Be like, I'm listening. I'm a huge Frasier fan, and whenever I watch that, I'm like, wow, am I like the 21st version of like a non-popular Frasier? But yeah, I try to talk people through it, and I try to. I mean, I think Frasier, he's talking to a person on the other line. It's hard sometimes. Like you're looking at the green light, and you're like, all right, like let's get this going. But yeah, it's sometimes challenging to get started, but I think there's a different way to communicate now. It's kind of like a one to many, and then people come back with comments, right? And it's actually really interesting dialogue that gets going around these things.
Yeah, very interactive. So,
Yeah.
so why, I guess, and how did you get involved in Zurb? And let me preface that Zurb is, when I do use a layout tool, it usually is Zurb. That's my one
Oh,
of
nice.
choice. I'm not a
Yeah.
big Bootstrap fan, and I'll tell you why. Zurb, I've been a fan of for years, and sure, maybe I'm a little bit of a fanboy too, but
Sure.
that might go into it. But it's amazing to me that it's something that you don't have to use their whole everything when you're going to use it. It's literally like they say, just a foundation pieces. So if you want, you just include the things that you want to include. You want a partial for this, you want a partial for that, include that in your Sass, boom, build it out. You don't have to use everything. And that's what makes it so powerful, is because you could make it really, really small or as big as you want. I mean, granted, people tend to go for, they just include the whole thing.
Mhm.
But sure, that's the novice, and that's kind of what you get when you have that level of nepotism and you hire your nephew to build your website for you. That's what's going to happen. But
Sure.
if you have somebody that's a little bit more seasoned, they know, yes, I'm just going to include this, include that, because it's super well documented and it's really clear on how you do it. And also, too, I'm a big fan of Ink. Well, formerly Ink, Foundation
Sure.
for
Yeah.
Emails, which is a fabulous framework for responsive email.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Just to be clear, so it's actually part of Zurb, an agency, which they're awesome, but I have the same kind of feeling about it, and I think sometimes it's maybe not, or people who are beginners coming into it don't quite see that, and they're like, "Oh man, this is bloated," or "I never use this in production," or whatever. But what's great about Zurb Foundation, it's been around for a long time. Two, they've got a great grid system that's very easy to understand. It's also very readable. So if you prefer code that reads like normal language, not like some sort of weird truncated syntax that you have to be like, what's a BTN or whatever. It's great for that because it tends to be a little bit more verbose, but a little bit more readable. And you can pick and choose, right? Like if you're like, hey, I just need a great grid system, like why learn a whole bunch of other tools? You can just take that grid system from Foundation and ditch the rest, right? And I've done this a lot on projects too for performance. And one of the things you can do in Foundation is to ditch all of the heavy CSS stuff, like the top bar, especially if you're familiar with how big the CSS that they're generating, and all the stuff with the JavaScript dependencies. And what you end up with is this really trim, really lightweight package that's reusable because you can use it across different different projects, and you can style it in a way really radically differently. So it's going to work for all those different projects too. And then the next project you use the same grid, same syntax, same things, right? And yeah, and if you go into Sass and you get into that with mixins, you don't even have to include any of the presentational classes. You can just use the mixins here and there for whatever you want. It could just be a single button. I'll just get the single button mixin, for example, which is not a great example, but it could be anything within the framework.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes it so powerful. Like you said, it's been around for so long. It's so well documented, and it's clear to understand. and you don't have to use all the things. I hear so many people talk about frameworks and they say, oh, it's so big and bloated, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's not. It's you just don't use all those things, and it's a super small thing. You don't even have to use their default classes. You could, import it in and set it up to use your own classes if you want.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they really have thought of everything. And I mean, even you don't have to use floats. You could use Flexbox. There's a Flexbox one for it now too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they have a Flexbox grid system that's really quite fantastic that they just introduced. And I don't know if you heard, but they just released one called the XY grid, which is kind of a funny name, but it's getting into this idea of like, where they're going with CSS grids, but we don't quite have the browser adoption, and using Flexbox. And Flexbox is okay, but it's actually a little bit, I don't say it's hard to understand, but it's not the easiest to understand syntax in terms of CSS, like if you're trying to lay things out. And so what they're giving you is like a really nice abstraction of like how to create a grid system like the float grid, but use Flexbox, and then you can just expand that. Now the XY grid goes one step further and allows you to get into this kind of vertical range, and they're describing things differently, which is very interesting. I don't know if it's going to catch on. Instead of talking about columns, because in float systems forever, we got columns, we've got no rows. The rows just indeterminate, could be anything. But now they're getting into rows and they're comparing it to a spreadsheet. And so they're calling things cells, right? They've got a really different way that they're describing it. Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder where that future is going to go. But yeah, it sounds like they're on top of that.
Certainly. Yeah, and Bootstrap's not necessarily the worst thing, but I think it lends itself to a certain kind of project, right? If you've got internal apps that all need to look the same, or if you're just like trying to hack something out for a hackathon, you want it to look a little bit more designed, or you got to get something done. Like, I think it's a really good tool for that. I think Foundation's got some advantages over it for visual design, strong visual brands, and like you're saying, the way you can kind of pick and pull different components. Bootstrap's adopted a lot of this, and so they're kind of, it's like an arms race. It's like Foundation comes in with like the awesome mobile UX, and like Bootstrap's like, oh, but we got it too, and then like boom, right, next time.
That's like, the competition. It's your Android and your iPhone, Mac and Windows. It's always going to be something like that. And yeah, I think probably the first one of those that I ever heard of was probably Bootstrap, and yeah, I think Bootstrap was the first one I also used. So, but it all depends. If you're going to try one of those frameworks, try to diversify. Try to explore all of them and see what fits your project the best way. Because you might find one that fits one project one way and another project another way, or you might just get put into a project without your choosing it. And you have to acquiesce and go into, say, a Bootstrap if you didn't want to, but you're going to be put into that possibly by chance. So it's good to know all of them, or a good, healthy exploration of all the popular ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I came into Bootstrap first as well. Hopefully those people aren't listening here on the background here. But, I started with Bootstrap myself, and I was looking at the other...
Somebody behind you!
Oh, yeah. So, I started with that, and I started looking into Zurb Foundation. There was a couple things that drew me to it. One, I thought they had a really better handle on mobile UX at the time. This is like Foundation 2, so this is like the early days of like mobile responsive stacking, and it was like just very simple stuff. But I felt like they were really thinking about, from the standpoint of the mobile user, like how can we make this experience really fantastic? And the Bootstrap felt to me more like, how can we make this also work on a mobile phone? But not necessarily, like they're just thinking about like how does it work? So it was a kind of a different philosophy. And I also really could gravitate towards, they had much better documentation, I think, like you mentioned. And they're kind of quirky. There was all sorts of weird, funny pop culture references and sci-fi stuff in there to kind of like little gems to find out. And Bootstrap sounded so corporate to me. I used to work a lot with Microsoft Technologies back in the day. And so it was just kind of a little more fun, a little more edgy. And both are great products. So I just kind of gravitated towards the one that maybe fit my personality better, and I was interested in the mobile UX, obviously. So I thought that's important at the time.
Yeah, you know what's also cool is that they thought about things like what is it, Yeti launch?
Do
you know, like I mean, so for people that don't like opening up a terminal, not familiar with it, just scares them. Like there's a lot of designers that look at that and go, nope, not doing that. I'm going to open up CodeKit. Is that the one I'm thinking of?
probably CodeKit's very popular.
Yeah. I'm gonna open up
Mhm.
CodeKit, and that's how I'm gonna run my files, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you're doing, it's a great way to get started, and also just a great production tool. But Yeti Launch does a lot of those things. You could start a new project. Boom, there you go. You can start a new website, application, or email, I believe, all with Yeti Launch.
Yeah, I mean, Yeti Launch is really interesting. So if you're a designer listening, check it out if you're on a Mac. I don't think they have it on Windows yet, but what it does is
I
it
don't know.
gives you access to these tools, command line tools that without going on the command line, and you can kind of try them out and see what the advantage is. And if you're using something like CodeKit, I mean, it's free. Check it out, and there's some advantages there. And I mean, probably you use Gulp and these kind of command line tools. So like once you know what those are, it's kind of like the gateway drug into that whole ecosystem because there's some advantages there to working with. They call it the Zurb template, and it's just basically a specific Gulp stack. But it really streamlines if you're trying to create this front end code like I'm describing. It really streamlines that process.
Yeah, it's so nice. It's a nice seamless experience when you are running one of those projects. I mean, I could imagine it's might not be as easy if you're doing something like that with a group of people.
Hmm.
Maybe if you have a team, but if you're just doing some stuff on your own, it's probably very easy to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the big thing I always try and tell people when they think about Zurb Foundation, what they're doing, like Zurb is an agency and they do killer work. And a lot of people, I mean, I think if you're into this, you probably already know, but they do, I don't know. Last time I was talking to someone there, they said like 100 websites a year or something. It was like, I'm like, wait, that's like every 3 days, like something. And they're doing like really high profile, really big things. It's not like some little one-off WordPress site or something.
Yeah,
And
they're
so
a big legit company.
oh yeah, and fantastic design. I know some of the designers there, and so what they actually built was for their own internal use, right? And so what is their problem they're trying to solve? Well, they're creating strong visual designs for visual brands and in a variety of different styles. And so for them, it's important to have a tool that's extensible that they can quickly build on, but doesn't kind of have this design that's kind of really prescribed. And I think that's where Bootstrap is different, where they have a much stronger emphasis on the visual design. So it does look more designed out of the box, but that you end up overriding a lot of this type of stuff depending on the type of design. If you're going for a Bootstrap style design, which you want to look like 80% of the web, then you're already good, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and the tooling with it too, and that's another place where people get lost if you're not into front end dev and all this kind of like Gulp or Grunt or where this stuff is going. But it moves at just such a fast rate. But there's like I would call it tooling, and it's about getting this right set of tools to kind of work efficiently, right? And right now, the Zurb template is, as far as I know, it's their own internal template that they've kind of open sourced to the world. They're like, this is how we build products in our agency. We're allowing you to use it too. Now, sometimes, if you've been a little bit closer to that, you might understand how the tools work a little bit better. And so I think the deeper you go down the rabbit hole, there's maybe some less documentation, but there's a lot of power and a lot of value there. And sometimes people don't realize that. So they've essentially built a tool to streamline their own workflow as an agency and make that really perform well and to be able to use on multiple projects, like I was saying, like hundreds per year. I mean, if you're doing 5 or 3 or even just 1 and you want to build on something, it's a great tool. So
Yeah, they're not just a group of people maintaining the tools that they build for people.
mhm.
Or they're actually doing a lot of things. So yeah, it's pretty cool that they have all this amount of work, and the genesis of that tool came from a way to make this fast, to streamline their own things, and then they share that with the world. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I was able to kind of latch onto that too. And I've been working with other companies and other agencies that use the same tool as well. And it's all available for free. I'm able to get in when there's like new versions, and when I'm doing client work, sometimes I run into bugs and all sorts of stuff. So I just pay it forward, right? I find a bug or I find some problem, like I found some issues with early ink releases, early kind of foundation releases, and I just I set up a PR, say here's what I found, here you go, and that stuff kind of gets integrated in a lot of I think my involvement with the framework has been kind of teaching people and kind of advocating for it and getting people kind of fired up about it. But it's a really, really cool thing. It's been really awesome to be a part of.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, like I said, I've been following them for a long time, and I really enjoy using their products for multiple things. So yeah, I'm really down with that. Hey, James, we're getting to the end of the show. We're pretty close. I got just a few questions for you before we wrap up. So one of the things I really like to ask people is, and if you've seen the show, you know what I might be about to ask you is, if you aren't doing what you do now, if you couldn't be around computers, if you couldn't do a job that was on design or development, what would you be doing?
I think I would want to work like in a national park or something, like be like a park ranger.
Oh, okay.
But it's like,
Yogi Bear around to put down those baskets, stuff like that.
Yeah, I love being outdoors. It's something. It's kind of counterintuitive, I guess, to being like really involved in the digital world. But like, I think I would just go from one extreme to the next. Like out in the middle of nowhere in Yellowstone or farther out, and making sure people put those fires out, or like you say, yeah, I think
like a Ron Swanson.
Yeah, in fact, actually, if I could be him as a forest ranger, that's exactly it. Yeah.
I think in the last episodes, like season whatever, when they were in 2017, actually was a forest ranger.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Parks and Rec, if anybody doesn't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not on it. I've been reading his book a little bit, Paddle Your Own Canoe, which is hilarious.
I heard it's so good. I can't wait to read it. His last Netflix special was amazing too.
Yeah. I have not seen that yet, but maybe after you read the book, I'll check out the special and we can circle back maybe. Yeah.
That sounds fair. I'll put a link to both of those things in the show notes. But yeah, I like that answer. The last thing I like to ask people is, this might be a little bit more of an existential question, but it's, a lot of people say, what's your favorite color, and people describe something about themselves, or people will say, if you could be any animal, what animal would you be? And you're kind of describing what you would like to see in yourself. Like, I'd like to be a bird because I'd like to fly because I want freedom, yada, yada. But what I would like to ask is, what is your heaven? When you die, you open your eyes, what do you see? What is your heaven?
That's a pretty deep question, man.
It is. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of context and some time to think.
Yeah, sure.
Personally, for me, when I pass away, I'd like to think that and maybe you have or have not seen this movie, but Kiki's Delivery Service, where it's like a wintry Switzerland, and it's just this beautiful place. And I always see like my family, like we're baking bread and we're in that beautiful house, and we're in this beautiful village, and it's by the water, it's cold, like that's how I see heaven, like this kind of beautiful wintry Christmas thing in Switzerland.
Nice.
Yeah, that's
beautiful.
That's my piece. What about you?
Yeah, I think my piece is like being on the beach in general. Something about the ocean, being out there, like
cold.
I'm not talking about like when you're on the beach with like 100,000 people, but like when you're out on the beach and it's like just you and like there's some birds and seals or whatever, and it's like you can hear the roar of the ocean. I think there's something like really calming and beautiful about that. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, there's been some people in my life I'd really love to reconnect with if there was ever a possibility. I love the idea of that, Well,
there's the Omega point.
Yeah, or just maybe, finishing things off on the right foot, if you can. I think that's maybe heaven enough, right? Like just, not leaving a legacy, but just like not leaving a disaster in your wake and just kind of being content and kind of doing the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, see, you had a good answer. That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So, James, is there anything that you would like to share with our audience before we wrap up? Any way that let's first start off by and how people could get in contact with you?
Yeah, sure. So best way to get in touch with me is I've got a free course. So if you're interested in some of the things I'm talking about with design systems engineering or design systems, and you're thinking like, this is something we got to do in our organization, or you're already approaching it and you're looking for some great ideas, I've got a free crash course. I'd love for you to check it out. It's totally free. But there's kind of an added bonus. So it's not just like, you get on the email course and then it's goodbye. But I have this email list, and I actually don't promote my email list. I'm like the anti-email list guy. So I'm not like on my website. You're not going to get like these pop-up like join it now and I'm going to send you something. So I actually don't do that. But I actually do email people every day of the week. So I have this kind of like laboratory feel. So I test out new technologies. I test out new ideas. I'm kind of going through my thought process on design systems engineering, how that's being applied in my client projects, ideas of how you can apply it in different contexts. Only way to get into that is to join this course. It's called designsystemscrashcourse.com. You can go there and sign up for this free introductory course, and you'll get kind of introduced to those basic ideas. But more importantly, you'll get on this kind of secret list that I've had as well. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Okay, cool. Yeah, I've actually did that, and I'm looking forward to the emails. Well,
Awesome.
hey, James, I just want to thank you again for being on the show and accepting our invitation. This has been really great. So thank you so much, man. Really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. In the YouTube, I've got a little bit of sun. It looks like I'm almost in heaven right now. So I'll wave goodbye.
Into the heavens.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been great being on the show. Thank you so much for having me out. Had a great time, and thank you.
Oh, thank you, James. Appreciate it, sir.